Hello, this is the voice of Stewart Pearce, and welcome to Deep Dialogues, a series of vital conversations that I have with global soul stewards from all over the world who provide us with an understanding of how we can create a new hierarchy of values that is absolutely significant at this unique time of becoming. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening. Hello, welcome, all you wonderful people, and of course the wonderful Bridgetti, who is sitting before us, this extraordinary lady that I'm going to formally introduce you to now. But for all of you, Sarah, it's lovely to see you. Sarah's already come into the chat box, which is absolutely wonderful, and I'm sure we'll have lots of people streaming in very, very soon. This is the 13th deep dialogue of this fall season that, of course, has been, as you well know, these extraordinary ladies. I've had such a wonderful time. Hello, Stacey. Hello, Janie. These wonderful, wonderful women. So we have this gorgeous lady that I'm going to introduce you to formally in a second, sitting before us. And then next week, so this is the penultimate, next week is the 14th deep dialogue, where the extraordinary Rebecca Campbell, Hay House sensation, is going to come on. Rebecca and I have known each other for about 4 years. And in fact, she and her husband came on a retreat that I gave in Egypt, the Resurrection Retreat, about, I think it was 4 years ago. So it's going to be fun tuning into her. I know that she's staying with her family in Australia, I think just outside Melbourne. So, without more ado, hello, Patricia. Hello, Jane. Let me introduce you to Bridgetti. Bridgetti is a live stream producer of considerable order and experience. She's a talk show host, a global goodwill ambassador, and an invisible disabilities advocate. Her most recent accomplishment was being involved as a contributor with a #1 best-selling Amazon anthology entitled Invisible No More, Invincible Forevermore, compiled by Linda Sunshine West. However, Bridgetti's live streaming career began whilst raising awareness for a Cape Town, South Africa water crisis in October 2018. Yes, she is a South African and lives in Cape Town, or thereabouts. And she was helping to alleviate the problem meant that she was featured in several international media outlets. But today, Bridgetti helps individuals and companies to authenticate their brand, resulting in positive audience engagement, which galvanizes the individuals concerned into a novel and ingenious video inclusion. Well done, Bridgetti. It's so wonderful to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I am absolutely looking forward to our conversation today.
And of course, it's called Living Unseen, which was an extraordinary moment of inspiration that I received from you when you very kindly had me into your writers' club. And I was talking about Diana, the Voice of Change. So thank you for that moment of inspiration. And of course, I was so tantalized by it that we had to meet in this forum. So thank you so much for coming. Do tell us, living unseen means?
You know, I felt unseen for the large part of my life. I grew up in the era when children were told to be quiet. They should be seen and not heard. And that has had a significant impact on my life, more so than I ever realized. I think at that point of parenting, perhaps parents were not as enlightened as parents are now. Now we encourage our children to speak their mind. We want to know what's going on, in their lives, in their heads, in their minds. And so we encourage children talking. But I was that kid in class whose report card always said, Bridgetti talks too much, and I would come home and my mom would say, stop talking in the class. The teacher would say, stop talking in the class. So never encouraged. So you never learned how to express yourself because someone was always telling you to be quiet. And when people tell you to be quiet or to do anything for long enough, that becomes a mantra. And so I've always I've always had an outgoing personality, and I think I have my grandmother to thank for that. But that was stifled for many, many years. I was not allowed to speak my mind. I was not allowed to have a voice. I was not allowed to have an opinion. It was considered disrespectful to have an opinion or to say what you liked or didn't like. So it was never, never, never encouraged. And I know that when I first got married, and that's 30 years ago, crazy how quickly time flies. But that was one of the things that I struggled with. Even when I first left school and I was employed, I didn't know how to speak up for myself. When I was bullied, when people were trying to put me into a box and not allowing me to become who I was meant to be, I didn't know how to speak up for myself. And so that was stifling in my career. And then when I got married, one of the things my husband felt was very frustrating was that he had a heart because he grew up in a different kind of environment where he knew how to express himself and was encouraged, but I didn't. And so one of the frustrations for him was me not being able to speak up for myself or say how I truly felt.
Mm.
Um, and I think it was him that created that awareness within me
Mm.
that I have a voice, that I can have a voice.
Mm.
Um, and I must say, I spent a lot of years feeling angry and resentful about the time that I'd wasted not being able to assert myself in conversation.
Mm.
And then having to learn how to assert myself,
Mm.
to learn that it was okay to have a voice after spending my entire life not having that voice and not being validated.
Mm.
I also grew up in an era where it was believed that it was not important for girls to have an
Mm.
education because she's going to become a housewife,
Mm. Mm.
you know.
Mm.
Um, so there were a lot of things, and you don't know what you don't know.
Mm.
So
Mm.
they were not issues per se growing up, but I became resentful of those things once I realized that it could have been different.
Mm. And did that
Um,
passion then suddenly encourage you to be very vocal?
it took a long time because I had to unlearn what I learned over many years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there were bumps in the road because it's a process learning to assert yourself in a manner that people will receive and that you will be respected. Takes time, it takes practice, it takes
Mm-hmm.
a lot of time. So I had a lot of hurdles to overcome in my journey, but I am where I am now. I'm grateful for where I am now.
Mm.
I've
Mm.
learned a lot
Mm.
along the way, and so
Well,
I'm grateful for the learnings.
this is really the purpose of life, isn't it? To investigate the capacity of what our living process is all about, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So, was the unpicking that you're speaking about, or the reinvestigation of self, until you actually really found your voice, was this more to do with unpicking the restrictions or the severe energy boundaries that were placed upon you as a child? Is that what you're referring to? Was it's an interesting juxtaposition, isn't it, that your husband, who is he of the same age or roughly the same age?
We actually have a private joke between us because I'm 6 months older than him. So in that period of 6 months, he loves telling people he's married to an older woman.
Bless him. So, but it's interesting that his journey, which was also South African.
Actually, not. My husband is from the Philippines and he grew up in the States. So because he grew up in the States, I think, and he traveled a lot.
Right,
Um,
right.
so I think he had a different view
Yeah,
um,
yes. Well,
on life what I had.
the social parameters within the two different cultures are quite remarkable, aren't they? You know, in the sense of their difference, because there you were in a constrained linguistic environment, presumably being regarded through a restricted code rather than an elaborate code, whereas there he was, from the Philippines, you know, going through all the process of what it must have been to move to the United States of America and then go through the educational unfoldment there, which is actually, generally speaking, even though we're talking about 50, 60 years ago, it was actually, presumably, I mean, it was about 50 years ago, he was being encouraged to be quite boisterous and sharing. What do you feel were the major social parameters that you were able to liberate from restriction?
You know, it was a weird thing, but I felt even after I was married, I still felt, when my parents disapproved of something I said or did, I still felt um, compelled to do what they wanted, even though I was at this point a married woman. It took me a long time to learn to say no without feeling guilty.
Mm, mm,
I would say that took me probably a good 5 years
mm,
before I felt 100% comfortable with saying, no, I can't do this, or no, I can't do that,
mm,
and
mm,
not feel bad about saying so.
mm, 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 mm. And how did you expunge the guilt?
You know, I actually went through a period where I did have some therapy, and the therapist helped me to uncover feelings I didn't even know existed,
Mm,
which was a
mm,
very interesting process for me.
mm, mm,
Again, as I said in the beginning, you don't know what you don't know until
mm,
someone makes you aware of that.
mm,
Um, and, I didn't realize how subservient I was, for want of a better
mm,
word,
mm,
until I was made aware of that,
mm,
and
mm,
that it was okay to feel what I wanted to feel and to be what I wanted to be as a
mm,
person, as
mm,
opposed to being something or someone that pleases the people around you.
mm, mm, mm,
Um, and it's not even about disrespecting a culture or disrespecting the upbringing of your parents. It's simply being allowed to be who you are, who you
mm,
feel you are from within,
mm,
and being okay with that.
mm, mm, mm,
you know,
mm,
I was never a rebel without a cause or anything like that. It's not about anything like that, but just feeling comfortable in my skin was
mm,
a
mm,
process.
mm. But
Um,
surely you've met many other ladies who express the same detailing. And so you were a revolutionary. You were part of the revolution of moving through the social changes of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, so that we could actually begin to see the remarkable shift of liberation that's taking place within the substance of diversity today. I mean, you were one of the vanguard, because by your liberation, a huge wave of energy would pass into your fellow sisters around the world.
yeah, it's been interesting, and I must say, you spoke about the book Invisible No More, Invincible Forevermore, and it was such an awakening for me to be in a space with 29 other women who had gone through a lot of the inner turmoil that I had experienced.
Mm.
And I must actually tell you, when we had, and I have interviewed most of the women in that book. So getting to know the backstory to their story on top of what they'd written was very interesting. I really enjoyed that. But when we had, once or twice we got together on a Zoom call, and almost all 29 of us were together, and we were talking about our upbringing. And I was shocked at myself to the level to which I literally broke down. And I mean, I had never met any of these women in person, but it was interesting how safe I felt,
Mm.
to the
Mm.
point where I was in tears. And I
Mm.
mean, that never happens,
Mm.
ever.
Mm.
But I felt so safe for them because I was listening to their stories, and
Mm.
a lot of their stories opened up wounds in me that I didn't even know existed.
Mm.
And so I felt safe within that space to truly open up and
Mm.
and say, look, I resonate with what you are talking about.
Mm.
We have different relationships throughout our lives. And sometimes, as I said again, we don't know what we don't know. Sometimes you don't even know that you're in an abusive relationship, whether it's work, personal life, marriage. You don't recognize it. You often don't recognize. And that was the one common thread I found with a lot of women. They didn't realize that they were in an abusive relationship, whatever that relationship was. It could be a friend. But until somebody points it out to you, you may not be aware of that. And then you go
Mm.
through all these phases of unraveling it, when that relationship needs to shift
Mm.
or
Mm.
change or
Mm.
end, whatever it is that you need to do to propel yourself forward.
Mm. Mm. So really, we're talking about a vast pathway of discovery, aren't we? Which I've been helping people through a similar individualized pathway of discovery for over 40 years. And I glory in it, do you see? Although I know that the emancipation that comes is often born of great suffering. The fact is that the emancipation comes, so there is redemption in all of our lives. And what I'm humbled by very specifically now is the way that you amazing women are really finding your voices to step forward and say, no, this will no longer happen. Meaning, we are no longer going to tolerate or compromise ourselves in relation to the levels of abuse that we're receiving, whether it be cultural abuse, whether it be psychological abuse, physiological abuse, sexual abuse, or any variety of abuse. You're all saying it. I just want to pause, if I may, because what some of the wonderful people are pouring in, and there's a very astute listening audience here of extraordinary ladies. Hello, Patricia, Jane, Maria. Welcome, Stephen. We have a wonderful man here as well. Alison, Wanda, Daniela, Dawn, Agnieszka, Alison, and Renee. Good evening, ladies. As you hear the wonders that Bridgetti is bringing forth, please, if you wish to write a question, please put it into the chat box. Good evening, Dorina. But that, the handle and the deep rootedness of guilt is such a major paradigm or emotional bonding to release. And I'm just intrigued, because guilt, shame, denial, there's such powerful woundings at the moment being released. And when you spoke of guilt, because it seemed to be an immense, alarming process that came forth as you were describing to us what you'd experienced in your awakening. I wondered how you were able to move into the root of guilt and alchemicalize it or heal it or just simply extubate it.
It took a really, really long time of introspection
Mhm.
Um, and I think what my therapist allowed me to do was teach me that it was okay to feel what I felt.
Mm.
It was
Mm.
okay,
Mm.
part of that was
Mm.
allowing myself to feel angry um,
Mhm.
about the abuse, basically, what
Mm.
occurred, you
Mm.
know,
Mm.
um, because when you're not allowed to be yourself,
Mm.
it is an abusive relationship
Mm.
when
Absolutely.
when when you
Absolutely.
are
Mm.
stifled.
Mm.
Um, and allowing myself to feel angry and just going through those emotions. I think when one discovers um, that you were not allowed to be yourself for such a long
Mm.
time,
Mm.
you don't realize how that affects you. And that process of realizing what you've been going through for years um, is terrible because you go through the sense of betrayal,
Mm.
as it were. It was a circle of people in your life that you had trusted, that has betrayed the trust that they were empowered with.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and so that awakening um, elicited some feelings within me that I'd never felt before.
Mm.
And at first,
Mm.
I felt guilty for feeling those things because, it all felt, those emotions were not things that I had learnt to feel or to recognize.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
so that took a really, really, really long time to process.
Mm.
And how do you then deal with those feelings of anger? Because it doesn't mean that you know, you can't not love the people in your life.
Mm.
You have to love them. And so you need to learn to see, or I spent years justifying why I felt the way that I had felt.
Mm. Mm.
um, and made excuses for years.
Mm.
So and with my therapist, I learned that I don't have to make those excuses,
Mm. Mm. Mm.
that I was justified to feel how I felt,
Mm.
and that and just to work through those emotions one step at a time. And you almost go through that whole process of, because now you have to relearn to see the person in a different light, in a new
Mm.
light,
Mm. In a more
uh,
transparent light.
in a more transparent light. And now you're almost mourning, in a weird way, the loss of the relationship you had with that person before.
Mm.
Because you're
Yes.
now building a brand new relationship or relationships with people
Yes.
in your life.
Yes.
The previous kind of relationship you had with them does no longer exists.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And it can either be good or it can be bad.
Mm.
But either way, you have to move forward. It was a long, slow process, is all I can
Mm.
say.
But that's what
Uh,
life
I
is about.
tried.
You're describing what life is about, I believe, because I've been in a terrain, I've been in an environment, a creative environment for many, many years, where we have permissibility to feel all sorts of feelings. I mean by that the entertainment industry. Actors are emotional gladiators. So they have to get really used to playing extraordinary feelings. And if, for example, one is playing an extreme level of emotionality in a smorgasbord of some really extraordinary feeling states that often we would refer to as being dark rather than light. There has to be permission given. Otherwise, as an actor, one's judging the person that one's playing. So we become used to accepting the volubility of all that percolates out of the extraordinary chalice or cauldron of what it is to be human. It is okay. And therefore, the shame that we felt, where we tried to suppress our anger, or the guilt that we felt because we were feeling deep urges within us, suddenly become livable. and therefore their unseen nature becomes an extraordinary passion on the outside of us to move forward with great empathy, understanding all of the darknesses that exist in our world, but also as pillars of light whereby we change all of those darknesses into compassion and empathy and understanding and comprehension and love, unconditional love. One of our people is talking about the bravery that you actually showed and how the layers of abuse found underneath, once alchemicalized, become a gift, she says. And this is one of the great teachings that she's learned through an extraordinary man called Lars Muhl, who is a wonderful Norwegian. Am I right in Norwegian? Or is he, yes, Norwegian, isn't he? Or is he Danish? No, he's Danish, isn't he? And Lars, I had on Deep Dialogue some time ago. Lars has a very specific relationship with the divine Magdalene, with Mary Magdalene and the whole substance of the life that she lived, we believe, with Yeshua post his extraordinary journey that he went through, where he was pinned onto a piece of wood called the cross. However, so you see, for me, the opposite of guilt, the extubation of guilt, is innocence, where we suddenly begin to realize the extraordinary nature of the way that we were as children, and that guilt is merely contaminated innocence. Well, once we've released the plug of the guilt, we can get back to feeling the boundless wonder and awe and permissibility of our own creativity, that force that just flowed through us with such abandon when we were kids, until it was stopped by our so-called caregivers or caretakers. Do you feel that you were able to discover that innocence?
I believe so. I totally believe so, because once I had gone through that process of feeling sad, feeling angry, learning to regain self, building up my self-esteem, I found my happy self again. I felt that I could truly be who I was meant to be. And I'm happy. I'm in a really, really happy space in my life. Um, and I've always loved giving of myself to people. And I do that more so now because I really like myself. Um, I'm happy with who I am, and and I feel that I can share that inner joy that I feel now with people in my circle and beyond.
And of course, within the field of this, you've been an extraordinary advocate for human crises that have taken place, and you've been able to step forward and vehicleize the whole substance of it through your voice and through the unique processes of live stream production and so forth and so forth. I mean, I'm referring particularly to the invisible disabilities advocacy that you have. And I remember when we first met, you spoke about it very passionately, and I was very touched by the stories that you were telling. Could you perhaps just elucidate, what do you mean by an invisible disability advocate?
Well, if you had to look at me right now, which is what most people would do, um, would you, just by looking at me, be able to tell that I live with pain every day, that I have a disability? Would that be obvious to you?
Well, it's a testing question because I'm an intuitive and a psychic, so I pick things up. That's part of the journey that I'm with. But I
So,
think we get your point. I think we get your
so,
point.
so generally speaking, people go by sight. And so when they look at me, I look like a normal person that is well. But I'm not. I have a invisible disease, in that I live with chronic pain. I've got a number of medical conditions that causes me pain and anguish every single day. Um, it's one of the reasons why I got into live streaming. I've always enjoyed working with people, organizing events. But because I have this chronic pain, I have fibromyalgia is just one of the things, osteoporosis. Um, so I live with chronic pain every single day of my life. I
Mm,
cannot sit for long, stand for long, walk for too long, lie down for long, anything. So all those things um, cause a lot of discomfort and severe pain sometimes. Um, and people are not aware of this. And the reason why I am an invisible disability advocate is because people generally need a visual aid to understand that you have pain. So if I'm using a walker or a cane or a wheelchair, people have a visible sign that there's something wrong with me. But I'm an advocate for invisible disabilities because I find that, like myself, most people in the community that I'm in, whether it's the medical profession, they're just as guilty, or just people at large will either tell you that you're a hypochondriac. They'll second guess you. They'll tell you that your pain isn't real, that it's imagined, that this is an illness of convenience so that you can be a drug addict. The things that they tell you is absolutely unbelievable. And so I want to be an advocate for people saying that those who live with invisible disabilities, and there are lots of invisible disabilities,
mm,
that there isn't a particular look, that there's nothing outside that can tell you how much pain these people are living in.
mm,
And that the medical profession, a lot of medics, I'm not saying all medics, but a lot of people, doctors punish people for having an invisible disability.
mm,
It is an awful situation, and that happens globally, not just in South Africa, because
mm,
thankfully, we can have these conversations and support groups from around the world. And it was an interesting journey for me to discover the similarities we have across the globe,
mm,
um, and how people are treated. The community of invisible disabilities is treated with such disrespect,
mm,
um, globally, and that is one of the reasons why I wanted to speak out
mm,
about this and just be a voice for invisible disabilities and just say, here I am. I don't look like I'm struggling, but I am.
mm, mm, mm. And what richness does that give you?
I feel immensely privileged that I have the voice that I have because a lot of people don't. And so I can speak on behalf of people who don't have the platform that I
Mm,
have.
mm,
Um, and I feel immensely privileged to be able to do that.
mm,
Um, and, it's been amazing, the world that's opened up to me because I have a voice.
mm,
And
mm,
um, and
mm,
I've learned so much about myself in that process, things I
mm,
didn't know about myself and about
mm,
other people. And so yes, that was another just journey for me,
mm,
and I hope to do more work in that field.
mm, mm. A famous philosopher 200 years ago said that the only vindication for suffering was art. What we're now seeing, interestingly, is that remarkable people like yourself step forward and speak of the living unseen, that speak of the mental health and physiological challenges that are being experienced every single day. I feel that you see, I feel humbled by this. I feel it's an absolute glory to hear the immense bravery and courage that you're showing as you move forward, and bring to your face and the whole of your being such charm and such grace. These embolden us And then when we begin to hear the quantity and the quintessence of your story, suddenly this opens our hearts. I feel that you're part of the revolution of empaths, which is a very remarkable role to play for awakening us to the gifts of the heart. And a number of other people are commenting on this in the chat box. One of you have a sister in the form of Alison McClure Garman, who also has the invisible disability of fibromyalgia. As indeed, I don't you've seen the extraordinary expose in interview between Oprah and Lady Gaga. Have you seen that interview?
I have, and I want to say something about that. Not that interview in particular, because there have been others. There are other famous people who also live with fibromyalgia. And I want to use this opportunity to say something about that. Fibromyalgia is not the same for every single person.
Of course not.
And there are different kinds of fibromyalgia, or stages or levels of fibromyalgia. And so the difficulty when you have someone who is very famous, who may not have it as severe as someone who's not famous, it can create the perception that it's not as bad as what you say it is, because someone famous said it isn't. So
Okay, I personally have never
sometimes the
actually.
difficulty that we have.
I personally have never felt that gives value to the perception, to be honest. What's extraordinary, surely, by someone who is successful in the public eye, is that they are completely transparent in their bravery about the fact that there is a level of success, but the level of success is born from profound suffering. So for me, suffering is purely relative. Your suffering is your suffering, my suffering is my suffering. Where we meet is where we meet in the empathic union of our hearts as we begin to reveal the truth of the great substance that we move through as we begin to evaluate the purpose of our suffering. Because it's obvious that there you are, quickened, breathing, rhythmically flowing, using your wonderful intelligence in the world. So that's what we see. We see your bravery, we see your courage, we see your forthrightness. Your journey, of course, is your own personal journey. I feel the more transparent we are, and therefore to encourage great artists like Gaga to step forward and talk about her own assault course of suffering, allows us to see that we're all human. I'm very touched by that.
I do believe
And,
I want to agree with you,
yeah.
because there is truth in that, and I'm not invalidating her experience by
Mm,
a long shot.
mm,
Um, there is, there's a lot of good in people like her also speaking out, because it does create awareness. And
mm,
because people
mm,
sometimes they look at someone who is as successful as she is,
mm,
and they get the wrong impression that her journey was easy.
mm, mm. Well, because she allows it to appear effortless. And that really is one of the great hallmarks of success, isn't it? That it appears to be in flow. And we're at a remarkable time of investigation into human consciousness where, for example, you spoke earlier about the great restrictions that were placed upon you when you were silenced. This I know very well within me as well, but how it also led to the understanding of great strengths. And so we're beginning to see that we are now becoming unbridled, although we have a difficulty having to wear muzzles at the moment still as a result of COVID. But, we are becoming more voiced, we are becoming more liberated, we are becoming more emancipated, we are becoming more expressed. And therefore, the extraordinary terrain of human psychology is being explored without judgment, without shame, without guilt, without denial. And that's what I find so remarkable because of the nature of how a leading personality may step forward. And of course, as we know, I just wanted to, because Alison has picked up in the chat box something that I was thinking about earlier, where the unseen visitor that was an unseen spectre within Princess Diana that led her to self-harming, that led her to try and take her own life, was of course bulimia. And bulimia was an unseen process, although we saw her get thinner and thinner and thinner. We just thought that she was a fashionista and enjoying what it was to be a very thin young woman, as we see represented often on the modeling platform. However, bulimia became a friend, which was a much closer friend than anything that was happening on the outside of her, until she realized how it was also a friend that was feeding off her in very negative ways and draining her from the natural force of her passion and the exploratory nature of her curiosity and impetuosity. And that's when she began to heal the nature of the way that bulimia had afflicted her for many, many, many years. I mean, it wasn't just something that came on because of the royal marriage. It had been with her for most of her, through her teenage years. I think she started when she was about 13 or 14, and then of course it reappeared during, 10 years later, during the early part of her royal career. Do you feel that there will ever be a release of collective shame?
I don't know. It's a process. I think we live in a society where we are allowed, we have a lot more freedom. Um, and also bear in mind that I'm in South Africa and I grew up in the apartheid era,
Mm,
again, where people's voices were stifled. Um, and I think, with the advent of social media, people have also learned to become more expressive, um, to speak their mind. Almost everyone who's got a mobile phone, a smartphone, can be a citizen journalist these days. And so we do have a lot more freedom of expression than we did just 20 years ago. In the last 10 years, things have changed radically. And so I do think, sometimes we maybe go over into the dark side and we become too expressive, where, it harms ourselves and other people. So there's a fine line when it comes to freedom of expression. I
mm,
always believe that one's got to be responsible. If you
mm.
want to be a citizen journalist, be responsible about it. And with great freedom comes great responsibility.
Could you give an example of what you mean by becoming too expressive?
I believe that you can't be too expressive to the point where you are encroaching on the freedom of someone else
Mm,
or the
mm,
right of someone else.
mm,
Or harm someone else. And I'm going into when I'm talking about, there's a lot of bullying going on online. And to me, that is moving into the dark side. People become
mm,
keyboard warriors
mm,
because they believe that they've got a right to express themselves. And I do not stand for bullying.
mm,
I will not tolerate bullying. So that's what I mean by
mm,
being responsible about your freedom of expression.
mm, mm, mm. Because what is extraordinary is the fact that we live in an age of transparency, meaning as a social adventure, what we're all doing is moving away from the constrictions and the restrictions that have been imposed upon us by the patriarchy for generation after generation after generation. So here we are beginning to discover our own personal sovereignty. And as a result, we choose the right for expressive transparency. But now what we're talking about is the moral issue of not necessarily what's right or wrong or good or bad, but what is accurate usage of transparent energy and what is inaccurate. And that when we move into trolling, bullying, anger warmongering, as we saw all the way through the latter stages, for example, the last 2 years of Mr. Trump's regime in the United States of America, there comes a point where we need to produce another social parameter that actually corrals the energy and brings us back to common decency and mutual respect, rather than the projectile statements that were actually being offered or issued. I'm receiving them all the time because I've stuck my head above the parapet with the book Diana, the Voice of Change. So people are always very vicious and want to kill me and all sorts of things. It goes it goes with the territory. What it does in me, apart from feeling initially rather upset that part of my energy conjures that level of darkness, is it automatically turns me to a tremendous amount of compassion for those people, because I know whatever the statement, it's not about me. It says much more about them and what they're projecting onto me. And then I think about, for example, the double administration of someone like Barack Obama, who was in a very remarkable position, as we know, because of his dark-skinned nature, and how the Republican Party in the United States of America were very much in denial of his position as the supreme commander, purely and simply as a result of the fact that he was biracial. And the way that he always showed grace as a result, he always showed compassion. And I think the line that both he and Michelle used was, when they go low, we go high. So there's always that search for the higher vibration, let's stand on the shoulders of giants, because they literally see further rather than becoming engrossed. So I welcome the transparency and I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm also a great believer in finding the right social parameters, so that it isn't projected, or it doesn't become hurtful or insinuatory, etc., etc. So we're learning those degrees, aren't we? It's quite fascinating. Could you tell us also more about the other invisible disabilities that you've been an advocate for?
I'm not sure which one you're referring to. I've been involved in so many endeavors. If you could just point me in the right direction so I could speak about the right one.
Well, when we first met, you were talking about the living unseen and how there are so many vital alternative abilities that are living unseen that we pronounce as disabling, but actually they're always, when they come to the light of surface within the consciousness of the individual, they suddenly become moments of great triumph.
Absolutely. We sometimes don't realize how disabilities are perceived by other people, but they can be enabling in a different way. Um, you know, Being disabled doesn't mean that you can't do something. It simply means that you are differently abled. You do something. It doesn't mean that you are less than someone else, which is a huge thing for the disabled community. It doesn't mean that you're less a person. I was reading something last night, and I just kept nodding my head at this. And I thought, how true that is, how dismissive people are in their speech. And sometimes people don't even realize how dismissive they are of the disabled community. People speaking past people who are differently abled as if they're not even there. Um, I have a very dear friend who's in a wheelchair, and she always talks to me about this, how people will talk to her carer instead of talking to her. She's got a physical disability, but she doesn't have a mental disability, and people just cannot seem to get past that. Just the fact that your body doesn't work doesn't mean you're mentally disabled. It's a huge, huge, huge problem. Just because I can't walk or use my arms or use my legs doesn't mean I'm not abled in other ways. You know, I spoke to a lady very recently from the organization called Billions Strong, and it was just amazing the things that this woman is accomplishing, you know, and the amount of challenges that the disabled community still has to overcome. Oh my goodness.
Mm. Mm.
There are massive prejudices that we still have, you know, a lot of opportunities that are open to people who are not differently abled. You cannot compare them. And people don't even realize how unfriendly our environment is to those who are differently abled.
Mm. Mm.
Um, you know, just to give you one example, and I am not wheelchair bound, and you know, I'm thankful that I'm not wheelchair bound at this point um, in my life. But just to give you one example of how I find, you know, people said to me, well, you know, someone mentioned to me that Cape Town is such a, you know, is very friendly to people who are differently abled. And I said, not from my perspective, because just walking in the streets in Cape Town, I became more empathetic to people who are in wheelchairs because I can't walk on an uneven surface, for example. It hurts my back tremendously. So just a little thing like that is huge for me. You know, let alone somebody who's using a rollator or a walking aid or anything.
Mm.
And those are things people don't think of
Mm.
because, you know, it's of no consequence to them.
Mm.
I love old towns, for example. I love old towns, love trees and the, you know, that sort of thing. But you often find in older towns where there's lots of trees, you find the roads are uneven. It may
Mm.
be something that you don't even notice.
Mm.
But I can't walk on those roads because it hurts my back immensely,
Mm. Mm.
even though I love it. But
Mm.
those are some of the challenges that people have with invisible disabilities or people with disabilities that other people won't necessarily understand.
Mm. Mm.
Um, so, you know, there's a lot of advocacy work that still needs to take place. And you know, something people often don't understand also about the disabled community is that you know, you may not be able to do one thing, but there are other things that you can excel in that people may not see or acknowledge. And
Mm.
you know, I think my message is just to be more open-minded and more embracing of the differently abled community. Just look around you, you know, see how friendly the environment is for the disabled community, and do what you can to offer support.
Mm. Mm. Well, you've just answered my question. What I was about to say, you know, in these profound recognitions that you're bringing forth for us, my question was about to I was about to utter was, what do you feel that we as an audience today could do? And of course, what you're suggesting is that firstly, become more aware of how a terrain that we may, as adequately abled individuals, walking around our cityscapes or indeed our countryscapes, that we're okay, but that when we actually encounter someone who is of an alternative ability, that we need to be more compassionate, more understanding, and offer more aid. And as a result of that, then the burdens that presumably come with having alternative ability means that we can automatically they can be lightened, and therefore understanding, comprehension, empathy can be opened, so that the whatever the drama has been for that individual, that the drama is seen to be lightened, and therefore, you know, through understanding and through compassion, therefore our world becomes a much fairer place. And we begin to live through mutual respect and common decency rather than than damning, so to speak. I'd like to return to something that you expressed earlier on about seeing how doctors were very damning about living unseen processes. Why do you think that they were? Why would, when you began to explore some of the pains and dissolutions that you were experiencing in a very open, frank, and candid way, why do you feel that the doctors were so damning?
You know, I have found that most of the doctors that were empathetic towards me have either had someone in their personal circle who's had a challenge that prompted them to want to look deeper into the subject. And so it became a passion project for them.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so when they encounter people in their practice that have something similar,
Mm-hmm.
their approach is completely different, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to a doctor who hasn't had that, who hasn't had a reason to look into an illness with that sense of passion. They
Mm.
always look at you with a sense of you know, you're exaggerating. It can't possibly be
Mm.
that bad.
That's
You're
that,
you're an
that
attention seeking person.
that's what I'm interested in. That level of psychology. What do you feel is the reasoning behind that? Why are they so damning?
I honestly do not know is my answer. You know, I fail to understand why they lack empathy
Mm. Mm.
for their patients.
Mm.
And doctors I've seen who have the empathy, as I said, are those who've had a personal experience. They either themselves,
Mm.
you know, it's like backache, for example. You know, I live with back pain every day. And so it's offensive to me when I tell someone, you know, I'm in so much pain today, and they say to me, oh, you know, I know exactly what you're talking about. I had this pain in my back and it was so bad. And I'm like, it's not the same kind of thing, because if you take a Panado, it'll solve your problem. My problem is not solved by taking a Panado. It's chronic. It's there
What's a
every single
pinata?
day. Um,
What's a
it, it's a painkiller.
uh,
You know, an
an,
over-the-counter,
analgesic? Yeah. Okay.
and
Yeah.
it's an yeah, over-the-counter analgesic.
Mm.
So for most people, you know, if they have a back problem, for example, if they can go to a chiropractor or you know, and have an adjustment, they can take some anti-inflammatories and it'll ease off and disappear and it's gone. That's
Mm.
not chronic.
Mm.
That's not the same as someone who's tried everything under the sun, all
Mm.
kinds of treatments, all kinds of analgesics,
Mm.
and the pain does not go away. There's a
Mm. Mm.
huge difference because, you know, and living with pain every single day um, affects your psyche.
Mm. Of course.
um,
Absolutely.
you know, and so people who live with pain every day also live with depression. They're constantly fighting depression
Mm.
because high
Mm.
levels of pain on an ongoing basis.
Yes.
Um,
So I have
that's
a
just
suggestion. I have a theory to put forward about the doctors, because of the amount of because of the tsunami of challenge today within living unseen, where it's often very difficult to use quantitative diagnoses. They become bewildered and frightened. And that fear is expressed through intemperance, impatience, or dismissiveness. It's actually because they're really feeling deep inside that the one mission that they have through the Hippocratic Oath cannot be fulfilled. And then, of course, the individual psyche or the individual personality, their own stance in life becomes threatened. Do you see? So we're living at a very extraordinary time where, of course, we're beginning to examine our role play, particularly in relation to the authority figures in our lives, and how we're beginning to alter or transpose the whole nature of patriarchal leadership into something which is infinitely more empathic. I'm, really, really sorry. We've come to a position of closure of our conversation. It's been absolutely, absolutely ravishing. And thank you, Bridgetti, and all the wonderful people that have been tuning in. I see we've had some really interesting comments in the chat box. And because I haven't necessarily called out your statement in the chat box, any of you, I'm talking about Margie or Dee or Andy or Alison. This isn't because I'm ignoring you. I'm seeing all of them. It's just that if I were able to engage in some of the statements that you've made, I think we'd probably go into some really, interesting, but other areas of concern, which unfortunately we don't have time to go into. So on your behalf, I'd just like to thank Bridgetti for the wonder of coming and sharing with such courage and honesty and delicacy all that you've given us. So I thank you so much from the core of my heart. And for you guys coming in, thank you so much. Don't forget that next week will be the last female spokesperson on Deep Dialogues, or spokeswoman on Deep Dialogues, for the end of 2021. And then there'll be a new season at the beginning of the next year with gentlemen, global male soul stewards coming in. And for those of you who are interested, don't forget that we have some really unique astrological portals that we're going through at this time, and particularly on the 21st, which is the winter solstice. And so this forthcoming weekend, I'm running a retreat to prepare for these vast emissions of light that are going to be palpating into our bodies. So please do come along. And my dear tech manager, Ryan, has just put up onto the screen the angelsofAtlantis.com/events. But of course, I'm not ignoring Bridgetti, because we will be placing her website and all of her details about the extraordinary live streaming programs that she's engaged in. So we will be putting these up onto Facebook and onto YouTube so that you can tune in. And on your behalf, audience, I'm sure you're willing to say thank you so much, Bridgetti, for coming on. And it's late into the evening in South Africa, but you look completely unexhausted. So hopefully there's been a degree of inspiration in your own life through this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, and namaste.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me as a guest.
It's been a pleasure, darling. Stay where you are. And Ryan, if you wouldn't mind closing down, please. And farewell, everybody. Namaste.